Welcome to the Math Ed Podcast. My name is Sam Otten from the University of Missouri, and today my guest is Dan Heck, who's a Vice President of Horizon Research. Dan, thanks so much for being here.
Of course, Sam. It's a pleasure.
So I mentioned Horizon Research. I was wondering if you could just let us know quickly what it is that you do at Horizon Research and how that's organized.
Sure. We're an independent STEM education research company located in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. We do quite a bit of work in third-party evaluation of funded grants, but we also have a number of our own grants and contracts. So we're a research and evaluation group, and also provide technical assistance both to funders and to grantees.
Oh, great. And I've had the pleasure of working with you several times, both as an evaluator on a Michigan State project, and then also as an advisor on one of our projects here. So,
right.
But it's good to be here to talk about some of your research, because you've spent a lot of time and effort really helping people think through their own research. So we're going to be talking about Dan's article that was published in 2019 in Educational Studies in Mathematics. And that article is entitled Scaling Up Innovative Learning in Mathematics, Exploring the Effect of Different Professional Development Approaches on Teacher Knowledge, Beliefs, and Instructional Practice. So Dan, before we dig into that article, I always like to just get a little bit of background on my guests. So I was going to ask you, where did you do your graduate studies, and then what did you focus on for your dissertation?
So I have a master's degree in education from Wake Forest. That was where I got started in teaching, high school teaching in mathematics, but then did doctoral studies at the University of Illinois in educational psychology. But I still focused on math education with that work. So my dissertation was really a methodological study about how different models of student achievement really define what we mean by achievement gap differently. So it was using a couple of different, I guess what we'd call equity factors, equity grouping factors, and modeling scores from a statewide assessment, using these different approaches to talk about what that might say about what it would mean to claim that there's a gap between groups and what it might mean to close that gap.
Okay. And who was the advisor that you worked with there?
Lizanne DeStefano. She's no longer at Illinois, but yeah, she was my advisor there.
Okay. Well, let's move into your current work. So this is a study that you undertook with Courtney Plumley, Despina Stylianou, Adrian Smith, and Gwendolyn Moffitt. And so this Scaling Up Innovative Learning in Mathematics, looking at the professional learning kind of experiences and different formats that teachers had. I was wondering if you could just let us know what the origin of this study was.
Yeah, and that's good to mention, because the real originator of this was Kathy Fosno at City College of New York and Math in the City group there. So Despina also works at City College and ended up being PI on that grant, but Kathy actually started it. So we worked with Kathy Fosno and Martin Dolk from the Freudenthal Institute in the Netherlands, whose interest was in the professional development that they provide for teachers that are using mostly using the Context for Learning Mathematics curriculum materials. So those are elementary grades units that are based on work from Freudenthal and other groups that are really about trying to teach mathematics through context. And I can say a little more about that when I talk about the professional development itself. But they had produced a lot of digital resources that were that they made use of in more typical face-to-face professional development institutes for teachers. And they were looking for ways to repackage and deliver those so that teachers could make use of them more independently from those institutes. And so that was actually the origin of the study, was to compare, a more typical institute experience for teachers with this kind of self-guided course using those multimedia resources. And then we also established a comparison group that would be using the same units but not receiving professional development through either of those means. So that became the three groups in the study. And they invited Horizon to kind of offer a third party, because we didn't have a dog in the fight, I guess, with any of this. So we were able to set up the research conditions and do all the data collection and analysis, but it really was a partnership with City College to do this.
Okay, and so you're interested in finding out what sort of results from these different ways in which the teachers can engage in professional learning. Were there ever any other kinds of professional learning that you wish you could have included in the comparison? Or, you have these three types that you described.
Right.
As you were going in there, were there others that came to mind or others that you wished about that couldn't be included?
Yeah, the multimedia course really was set up as almost like an independent study for people. We really looked at that as a little constrained because something that might be done in a PLC at a school or a district where teachers are working with those materials over the course of a year or more, but doing so with colleagues was another possibility that we had thought of, but again, trying to make kind of strict distinctions between the different experiences that teachers had, we chose not to do that. The other thing I think was, and this we write about in the discussion and conclusion of the paper, is that this was really not meant to be a horse race to choose which is best, but we didn't see a lot of value in kind of having these hybrids of the different formats, but we actually believe that kind of thing is probably where teacher learning is going to be most supported when they have access to all these different types of professional learning experiences.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a good clarification. Like you're not seeking a winner out of these. You're not assuming that one of these is going to be the best, but you want to see what are the affordances of these different formats for professional learning, and then by learning about those affordances, that might inform us as a field about how we might put them together or what purposes we might try to employ them for.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I hope that's what we learned from it was, what are some of the real benefits of each type of learning engagement. And although we didn't test it, I think we suggested some ideas about how to put those together to, not just as a kind of sum of the parts, but maybe something that's more than the sum of those parts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we have the facilitated workshop, we have the multimedia course, and then we have those curriculum resources.
Right.
And then you're also going to look at teacher knowledge, teacher beliefs, and then even some at instructional practices. So could you tell us a little bit about the data that you had, and then how did you analyze the data to sort of, draw that whole picture together?
Mm-hmm. So one thing was we did collect data about the teachers' engagement with each of the learning experiences. And I should say maybe before we go on, the curriculum materials only group we did not really treat as a control because of the nature of the curriculum materials. They really actually do provide a lot of learning opportunities for teachers in the sense of educative materials. So that really was another learning format. So we analyzed the nature of each of those opportunities or experiences that teachers were assigned to in those groups. And then the data we collected from teachers, we had, pre and post measures of beliefs about what was important in teaching early algebra and teachers' sense of preparedness to teach those topics at their grade levels, because this spanned a lot of grade levels. And then we had 3 measures that were open-ended responses from the teachers that were really tied to the kind of teaching that the units promote. So one was about this idea of using context as a way to develop mathematical models and mathematical understanding. Another was about using a device that's in this particular curriculum that are strings of related problems. So it's a series of, what might just look like exercises for the students to do, but they're carefully put together to develop a set of concepts as the students work through them. And then the third one was a video prompt of 2 students working on a mathematics problem, and the teachers had access to both the video and copies of the student work. And so they were analyzing what the students understood and where a good kind of next prompt, if you were to confer with those students at the moment of this video, what questions would you ask them to push their understanding forward? So we had those measures, and then we also asked that all the teachers were expected to teach the unit during the year. So we kept a log of their use of the unit as well. So that was the instructional measure was through that logging of their implementation of the unit.
I'm speaking with Dan Heck about his article in Educational Studies in Mathematics. So I just want to go right ahead and look at what you found. But let's start by talking about how you mapped the professional learning experiences, these three different formats that you were focusing on. Mm-hmm. How did those map to the general principles that you were thinking about of professional learning overall?
Mm-hmm. We started from the what we often call kind of the professional consensus about effective teacher learning opportunities. So things like duration and coherence and collective participation, active learning opportunities. We took that set and analyzed each of these professional learning experiences. What we saw from the the Facilitated Institute was really built on these principles. Mm-hmm. So it was probably what would generally be considered a high quality learning opportunity for teachers according to those principles. The multimedia course really offered all of those things as well, except for collective participation, which I mentioned before. We wanted to look at this as kind of a self-guided, self-studied course. So it didn't have that aspect to it. It also didn't have expert facilitation in the kind of classic sense, that because there was no facilitator, but the way that those materials were put together and the guidance for teachers to work through them was done by those same experts that led the Institute. So while the teachers weren't interacting with them, they were benefiting from the guidance about how to work through that self-guided course. It was really when we pushed ourselves to apply that same kind of thinking to the curriculum materials that we realized that really wasn't just a control condition, because those materials do have a lot of elements of, again, what we'd call educative curriculum materials. There are sample student responses, there are suggested questions for teachers, there are sample dialogues between teachers and students. There's a lot of information about the mathematics content and how it's developed in the units, the different contexts and models that are introduced to develop that content. Having applied those principles, we really saw that as another professional learning experience that had those same features for teachers if they were to work through it in that way, as well as, that actually shows a nice overlap with what we mean by educative curriculum materials, that good professional development and good educative materials share many of those same features.
Mm-hmm. So with that all in mind, what did you find with your co-authors when you looked at the impact of those professional learning experiences on the beliefs, knowledge, and instructional practice?
I think our going in, we kind of imagined that the Facilitated Institute probably would have stronger effects, and then the multimedia course maybe, and then the materials. What we found actually was growth in all three conditions, and only very minor differences among them. And that growth was pretty consistent across the different instruments. Not every single one, which I actually find that kind of comforting. That everything didn't come up rosy. I always sort of worry if that's the case. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so what we ended up seeing was pretty consistent and notable growth on most of the measures that we had. The one that did not show that growth was the use of these strings of related problems. And again, that was across the board. We didn't find that the way we were measuring that, at least, that we were able to detect growth. But all the other measures we did.
Yeah, to me that's very interesting to think about, and especially just the role of the curriculum resources themselves as something that I'm actually hoping to study more, mm-hmm. Looking at providing some curriculum resources and then thinking about it not just as a kind of throwaway kind of control thing, but sort of really investigating what can come from those curriculum resources in terms of teacher knowledge or especially instructional practice. Mm-hmm. I know it's kind of from our history in math education that we've tried big experiments on like a national level of trying to change curriculum resources, and we know it's not the magic bullet. Mm-hmm. But if there are some benefits, some impacts that are positive that can come from embedding features into curriculum materials or things that can come from curriculum materials, it's good for us to know about it because that's something that's easier to scale up. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And that's actually consistent with Horizon's work on the local systemic change through teacher enhancement evaluation a number of years ago. All that investment was based on, the districts or schools adopting curriculum materials and building professional development around it. There were a number of positive effects in that investment. So, yeah, I don't think we're looking for the solution. I think we're looking for the combination of things that are going to provide us the best opportunities for teachers and kids.
And your study, too, talking about that kind of comparison and, sort of the benefits that can come from curriculum resources by themselves, also reminds me of this Polly articles by Polly Wang and others. It's from 2018 in Early Childhood Education Journal. But they, if I remember correctly, they looked at a kind of facilitated, extended professional development experience for teachers at the elementary level. And then they also compared that to just giving the teachers some technology resources and stuff that they can use if they want to. Mm-hmm. And surprisingly, it was kind of almost a wash. It was almost like similar benefits on both. And there wasn't a lot of, there wasn't as much gained by having this extended facilitation as you might expect. And so to me, that's something I kind of want to revisit that in conjunction with what you're finding in your study.
Right. My sense is what would serve the field best is figuring out what is sort of unique and strongest about each of these opportunities and then building them together so that we can have coherence and efficiency in the support that we provide for teachers.
Yeah, and we can, I'll just echo the efficiency part because, if there's something that you really want to achieve with teachers and you can do it for, much fewer resources, much less time commitment, much less money invested, that's something we should know about. But then if you want some of the nuance, some of the influence that can come from a facilitation and detailed interactions with, between teachers, then in that case, that's where you can kind of push to that side of things.
Right.
I want to, though, ask you one more thing that you looked at in your study. You have this interview data with the teachers. I was wondering if you could just talk about how that interview data arose and made its way into the article.
Yeah, so the original study that we submitted didn't have that component and was not accepted for publication with the suggestion that we do more to tie the teachers' learning to the experiences that they had. And so because, of course, through the review process, a good bit of time had passed then, but we were still able to do a little more data collection, we developed this idea of contacting some of those teachers that we had. We had this other data about their learning, and this was now 2 years later, and follow up with them to have them describe their own learning in light of the different experiences that they had. And our goal was to try to determine what about each of those experiences they, would attribute their learning to. So what we found in doing that was that, for each format, the teachers could still pinpoint specific experiences that they had that they believed supported the learning or changes in their instruction. And those things really mapped quite nicely to these features of effective professional learning or to features of educative curriculum materials. Our questions were actually fairly open to them, and the kinds of things they mentioned really did align well with those things. So that was a way of addressing that concern about the article, but also extending what we learned about it to understand that those features that we think are important, teachers also tend to think are important for their own learning.
The article is called Scaling Up Innovative Learning in Mathematics, and it's published in Educational Studies in Mathematics. And Dan, I was wondering if you could just kind of summarize for us what you see as the main takeaway from this article for our audience.
Yeah, so I will first say that the main takeaway is not to choose from these formats, but that each of them offers strong learning opportunities that can influence teachers' beliefs, knowledge, and practice in positive ways. And I think it offers some sense of what each of those different formats, the facilitated workshop, the multimedia self-guided course, and the educative curriculum materials can offer. And again, in this case, it's independently but maybe gives us a way to think about how those can work in concert to support teachers' learning and change in their instructional practice.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know you've listened to the podcast before, so you know this last question that I have, but even though we've worked together for a while and know each other, I actually don't know at all what your answer to this is going to be. So if you were not in mathematics education as your career, what can you imagine doing instead?
So I'm a great lover of the outdoors and our national parks and public lands. I am just fascinated by landforms and geology. So I think if I was not a math educator and could restart my career, or if I can imagine doing something different, it would be a geologist where I could spend that time outdoors but make it my professional life as well.
Do you have a particular favorite national park or just one that really has hit home with you?
Yeah, I worked in Yellowstone when I was in college, summers in college. I worked as a cook and a waiter in a village in Yellowstone National Park, so that has a really special place for me.
Well, Dan, it's great talking to you. Thanks so much for doing the interview.
Thank you very much, Sam.